Hey, welcome to the Votary Podcast. We're a team of filmmakers based in New England who are passionate about storytelling. We talk about the impact that stories have in every part of our lives, from business to culture and everything in between. Thanks for joining us.
Ready.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is podcast episode 23. And we have our wonderful friend, Dan Rosario. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Here's a little bit of trivia, which I bet Dan will fail. Dan, can you remember where we first met?
Yeah, I just got an F on that test. I can't remember. It's been a while, though.
That's because you're memorable and I'm not.
No, I forget everything. I'm terrible with
did
stuff
Dan
like
arrest?
that.
Did Dan arrest you?
The first place that I met you was at City Church, in like one of. Do you remember Luis? I don't remember his last name.
Luis Diaz?
Yes, Diaz.
Yeah.
Good motion graphics guy.
Yeah.
He and I were going over some motion graphics stuff, and you popped into the office, and you were showing. It was either a short film or a music video.
Probably a music video.
It was all I remember was that there was a funeral scene.
Oh, yeah. That was a short film.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was.
Okay. Yeah.
So Louis and I had worked on it. We had a program back then at the Dream Center called Affected, and it was Affect Education, and we had at-risk youth who were part of the production team, and we wrote that story. And I remember now I remember it was the first time he'd seen a completed edit as well. So yeah, it was a few months worth of work.
Am I right in thinking that was right around 2007, 8?
Yeah.
Somewhere there.
Maybe,
8?
let's see. That was probably sooner. I would say 2004, 2005.
Really?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Because it's going back.
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, because I moved here in 06.
Okay, so
into 07. But it was right after I moved here.
Yeah. Yeah, somewhere around there.
Somewhere in there.
Yep.
So that's going back. So that's
I
as
remember
far
when
back as I remember.
When you first mentioned Dan to me, you had come to our old office, and in just the fact that you were a detective who was a filmmaker was like the coolest thing, and you were all jazzed up. You're like, I met this guy. He owns a Red. He's like a legit filmmaker, but he's also a police detective. And it was like this, like I was like, wow, this is like you were like mythologized. Is that the word?
So normally we ask people how they got into filmmaking. We'll get into that, but let's even just say this: how'd you get into police work?
So I remember exactly the day that the idea came to mind. So my stepdad was a police officer in the city, and he said to me, "Hey kid, take the test." And I looked at him and I said, "Okay." It was the first time that the idea even popped into my head. He just told me to take the test, and so I did, and I got 100 on it. So I figured, okay, so maybe I know a little something about this. And the rest is history. It happened pretty quickly. I took the exam and was in the academy in less than a year. And, from the moment he told me to take the test to the time I actually was pinned with a badge, it was less than a year, probably about 11 months.
Date yourself. When was that?
That was in 1989, so 33 years ago.
Amazing. And we're doing this podcast in 2021, and you are retiring.
Yes, I am. September 29th, 2021.
Less than 3 months away.
I didn't know that.
2+ months away.
Yeah.
You're done with police work for the most part, right?
That's right. Well, for the most part, absolutely.
For the all part?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's it's been something that I've been thinking about for a while, and just the timing is right. And I think that the next step of my life is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of work, but it'll be a lot of fun.
So a lot of times people thank those in the armed forces for their service. But I also want to thank you, sir. You know, it is a service to, serve our local community. And especially now, it's a kind of a challenging time. I haven't really read the numbers, but I know that recruiting is down and people are retiring. And
oh, yeah.
You could maybe speak to it more. But
that's a whole other podcast. But, yeah, you're right.
So it's not every day that you meet someone who's made a career out of police work and loves filmmaking and storytelling as much as you do, and has done as well as you have done at crafting that sort of second career.
Yeah, I've managed to balance them both for quite a while, and I would say that the filmmaking part, the creative part, has really been how I've mitigated all the other things that happen. So things that I've experienced in my police career have been much easier to deal with because I have that creative outlet. And it's given me a unique perspective, a unique sort of storytelling perspective, very firsthand, real world type things. And I try to write some of that into my stories. I try to write some of those real world experiences and make them entertaining as well. So that's kind of where I am right now.
You know, when we say Dan's a real filmmaker, we mean Dan really is a real filmmaker. So, and a gear nut. Like, you've amassed how much gear over the years, like crazy, high end camera packages and very expensive grip and stuff that, you know, if you're not pro full time, all doing it, doesn't seem like you should have it, but you have, and that's
it doesn't seem fair. It really doesn't seem fair.
And to your credit, you've been so generous in loaning that stuff to us over many years, and another thank you to you for that.
You're welcome. Having the right tools is important, obviously, and I'm just the study of it. When I see something I've never seen before, I want to know how it was done, and a lot of times that has a lot to do with the gear, how a camera moves and why it moves, and the best way to really get that thing to match what I've seen is to have the same gear. And so over the years, some guys like sports cars and houses on the Cape, and I like gear, so I bought a lot of it. And knowing how difficult it is to come about some of that stuff when I see fellow filmmakers who are in need, I just lend it out. Some guys want to rent everything, and I'm like, nah, just take it.
That's awesome.
Take care of it for me and bring it back safe.
So the same question, when did you first think about, hey, I like movies, maybe I want to make them? Or
I don't know if I can really pinpoint it, but I know that, so the performing arts or art, like artistic expression has always been part of who I am. As a child, I grew up in church around music and musicians and, performances. And so I was heavily influenced by the church environment, very young. And so my dad was a trumpet player. He was a pastor. And so I used to watch him get up there and, he'd play with the church band. And I learned to play guitar when I was a little kid. And so it sort of started there, that artistic part of me. But since I was a pastor's son, I was in church so often that there were times that I would get bored, to be honest with you. And so my mom would sometimes give me a piece of paper and a pen and, sit me down and tell me to keep myself busy. So I started drawing. And I sometimes I'd hold the book open, I'd sit there and I'd draw all kinds of characters and cartoons, and I started mimicking things I was watching on television.
So you're drawing in the Bible?
So yeah, sort of. I was sort of using it as a
highlighting, underlining.
Yes,
I did the same thing. Only it was with the pamphlets.
Yeah,
whatever.
Sure.
Yeah,
Nobody reads Leviticus, anyways.
So I'd hold it up like I was reading something important, and then I was drawing on the inside. Yeah. And so that sort of led me down that path towards, because I'd get a lot of feedback. My mother said, "You drew that?" I'm like, "Yeah." That's great. Can I keep it? And I was, why? This is my first impression.
Can you sign it?
Why? But I just kept going along that path. And so because I had the music in my blood and I was drawing, as a kid, as a teenager, it's sort of, graffiti art was my thing. Loved the colors and the shapes and the styles. And it sort of feels like it all melded together. So anything that really was an expression of creativity was born from my experience in the church, and then always wanting to deliver a message of some type, something that was hopeful or positive, was like very natural for me. It's something that I heard so often as a kid. So between art and music, it sort of culminated in that final stage where filmmaking, or the art of storytelling through visual content, just seemed natural. I was at one time a music producer, I had a recording studio. I had it for years. I mean, I still have it. I just don't do it as often as I used to. And I've been consumed by the idea of filmmaking for, I don't know, 25 years or so.
What was the first thing you made?
I think the very first official production was in 1993. I think it was through South High School. And they had a television production program, if you will. And I remember needing some assistance, so I went up there, and I knew they had a television station or they had gear. And I met a teacher named Frank Walsh. And Frank was probably the most influential person. I was, had maybe 4 years on the job as a police officer. And I'd done other things, but never experienced anything to do with television production until I met Frank. And Frank, being a school teacher, was just so open to sharing what he knew. And I was a policeman, and I was a young policeman, and going into the schools, kids saw me there. And it was just, I don't know, just everything clicked. And Frank and I just came up with this idea, let's make a video. And we ended up getting three of the high school kids at South to make a rap video. And it was really cheesy, but it was kind of cool because all we did was we used the chroma key, a green screen, and the kids rapped in front of the green screen. And then we sent out a bunch of students to go just get some B-roll from Worcester, and we put it in the background.
Amazing.
And that project was called Too Smart for the Streets. And we won the Drug Fighter of the Year award from Massachusetts. So at the time, I think it was Governor Dukakis, maybe. I forgot. It was a while ago, but
amazing. It
was a big deal because they had an event in Boston at the Kennedy Center, and I shared the award with actor Charles Dutton. Do you know who he is? He was in Aliens. He had a show on TV called Rock. So it was pretty cool because I watched the show, and I ended up talking with him for a long time, and every little step, every little affirmation in there, every little confirmation in there drew me closer and closer to wanting to continue to do it. And it was because of that program that the Governor's Alliance Against Drugs, which is the organization that recognized the video, pulled me aside afterward and said, "Hey, you want some money to make another one?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Let's do it." And so from that one was born the Live in Peace Project, and that was in '96. And that was the first time I filmed anything with 35 millimeter film and Cook lenses and an RE camera and a whole crew. That was the first time, and I've been addicted to it ever since. There's no getting it out of my blood now. Wow! So it's been a few years.
It's awesome. What did you shoot that first high school project with? What camera?
Those were Sony VHS cameras, and they were pretty old cameras, but I'm guessing that maybe those were donated to the school at some point. They were old when we touched them, old when we used them, but the final product was a VHS tape.
So that's pre-digital, and you probably don't have a copy of that.
I do have a copy of it. I absolutely do.
Oh, I'm sensing a podcast edit cutaway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, so good.
I have.
You're gonna deliver 16 terabytes of videos. Yeah, maybe you should edit through this.
It's just his way of getting us to edit his latest project.
Yeah, exactly. I'll end up with a reel after it's over.
I have some footage. We filmed for 3 months in Guatemala.
Yeah.
Here's a script.
You can follow that.
You guys cut that together. I'll take first draft and I'll let you know what you should change. So yeah, it's been a long road, but it's been a learning process. And every opportunity that I get to work with somebody local, I'm always reaching out to folks. I'm always willing to learn something new, and I always want to share what I've learned. There's an old saying that's something that I've repeated a million times to people: is that a candle loses nothing by lighting another. And so I've always been, I don't mind sharing what I've learned, and I love when I learn something from someone else. It's been my attitude from day one, and it's been beneficial to me. People are usually willing to help. Usually.
Yeah, have things changed a lot in the last, you've been doing it for a while, so in the last 20 years, it seems like Boston and Worcester have a little bit more attention with just Hollywood films, and more films are being shot around here. Like, have you felt that change? Like, even just being like
dramatic.
Yeah,
The change has been dramatic. So at one time, I mean, it's, Worcester, people would look at you and go, "Where?
You're making what?
Yeah.
Where? Yeah."
I'd say that the changeover started back when they shot American Hustle here, and I don't know what brought that film to Worcester, but I'm glad they came down.
The tax credit.
Well,
Could be, yeah.
but I heard too, because it was a film taking place in the 70s. There's so much in Worcester that hasn't
that probably
changed
has
from the
changed.
70s.
The old time look.
Yeah, we got a lot of old mill buildings and
I knew they didn't develop the city for a reason.
Got to keep it a film set.
They were thinking
period
about
piece.
that.
Sorry.
It's funny though, because now it doesn't have that feeling in
No,
the
it's
same way.
changed.
It's starting
It's-
to modernize.
It's updated for sure.
Yeah,
now.
but
If you just go anywhere downtown near where the old Galleria was, and suddenly you go, wait, wow, this has changed. It's very modern.
yeah. So what happened with American Hustle? For
So
you?
I think that American Hustle was the first time that I saw like a major Hollywood production being shot here.
Right,
with big stars, and even though I remember being maybe 50 feet from a couple of the leads and having no idea who they were. I really didn't know who they were until afterwards, and I watched the film and I thought, wow, they really made Worcester look cool. It looks like a film, even though, quite honestly, I was distracted by the familiar places.
Me too.
I had to watch it a second time to enjoy the story, but the first time I saw it, it's similar to Andrea Jamien's film,
Honest
An
Thief.
Honest Thief.
Yeah.
Very distracting if you live here.
Yes. So looking at the locations, I'm like, I know exactly where that is, and it pulled me out of the film. So then when I watched it again, I was like, I could enjoy it for what it was. I'm impressed with how long Major Taylor Boulevard was in that film. It's probably like 30 miles. But it's actually
They just
like
kept going back and forth.
I was like, wow.
If you look at the window, you see the same thing going back and forth.
They just keep driving backwards in their car and just drive forward
pretty
again.
cool. And so watching the way that they put that together, it's all part of what I've always believed was possible, that we could have an industry here, or at least local. When I say local, New England could have a Hollywood level industry, and it seems to be happening more and more. I mean, hundreds of films since American Hustle was filmed here are in the New England area. It's unbelievable that the amount of cast and crew that are being hired from the New England area is amazing, and it didn't exist 10 years ago. It's the changeover has been fantastic, and I have it on good authority that this is probably the way it's going to go for a long time.
Yeah.
As weird as it sounds, I heard the other day that they're even going to film scenes from Black Panther 2 in Worcester.
Oh, wow.
And I scratched my head going, where?
Nah.
Okay.
That's
I mean, that it's pretty awesome. I mean, I don't know if I can confirm it. It hasn't been a press release, but I have, in fact, seen lots of people repeating it on Facebook. I saw a, Wakanda 2 or something like that. It was some kind of... announcement, and I thought, okay, if that happens, then they're telling the truth. Worcester's really arrived as a place where it's filmmaker friendly or Hollywood friendly, and we invite people in. Sure, use our city. Come on down. Perfect example of that. Next week, the film Fletch, starring John Hamm, will be filming in my office next door at the police station.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty groundbreaking.
Yeah, I saw an article that he was downtown just the other day doing a scene or something. I didn't know until I saw it that they were filming here. But.
Yeah, they were right across the street from Westerman's Prop House, Cicero's, the bar, shooting a scene there as well. And so, I mean, look at who we've had in our city. We have had George Clooney and a bunch of other folks that you would 10 years ago they would have asked you where,
Right?
Where is that? But it's good. It's a good feeling to know that this industry is here. I'm hoping that it's here to stay, and that folks like us who have always, sort of been pining for a real opportunity can jump on that train and make it happen. I'm certainly not going to stop trying.
Yeah.
So,
Well, even Fallon here, who's interning with us, her boyfriend is a grip on Dexter right now.
cool. Yeah, I've got a
gaffer.
bunch of friends on Dexter, and before that it was Castle Rock, and that series
Right.
shot in this area, and they used a lot of locations in Worcester. Hulu production. If we went down the list, we'd have to.
It's maybe it's getting to the point where it's not. It's commonplace enough that it's not so easy to list it all out.
Yeah,
we talked about it with Andrea, that where the industry is going is really interesting. It seems like people are becoming more and more disillusioned by Hollywood, and LA is experiencing mass exodus to all these other cities in the country, and it feels like it's becoming a little more ubiquitous, where cities like Austin and Nashville and Worcester are getting more and more films being made there. They're not all staying in LA.
right.
And there's probably tons of reasons for that, but it is exciting to see where it's going to go.
Absolutely, and it's funny that when you mention those cities, you paused at Worcester for a second, almost with a smirk, like, "Am I really saying this?" And that's kind of cool, isn't it? Like we're on that list.
Yeah.
And 10 years ago, that even considering saying that would have been so ridiculous.
Well,
And-
10 years
and here we
ago,
are.
people would have just said Boston.
Right, Boston. Exactly.
Forever
Where are you shooting
people
that?
just said,
Where do you
"Oh,
live,
outside
Boston?"
of
Well,
Boston.
Yeah,
No, it's not Boston.
An hour outside.
but
Boston.
yeah.
All right, but in all fairness, with Fletch, so the Worcester Police Department Detective Bureau will actually be the Boston Police Detective Bureau.
Oh,
It happened.
They did that.
So it's written into the script. I
Yeah,
imagine
yeah.
that they need to do
Well,
that.
because
so,
Boston, has a more of an interesting reputation.
Sure.
Wait, did you have a role with American Hustle? Were you not obviously a role, but did you?
No, I wasn't part of the
You
production.
weren't part of the production. You
No.
were hanging out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm because I have a little bit of access to things. I was able to get into the set.
Yeah.
And it was through some of the connections of the folks that I know who are working in the industry now.
Was it when they were shooting in Nick's Bar?
I wasn't
I
at Nick's
remember
Bar,
driving
but
by
Union Station.
Oh, Union. Yeah.
Yeah.
That the museum and Union Station are very obvious when you watch the movie.
Oh,
That
yeah.
took me out of the
Yep.
movie too when I first saw it. I was like, like, you just-
Even some of the
you're like-
downtown scenes, I was like,
Yeah,
that's-
you get like excited to see it on film because they do these beautiful just like environment shots with no people sometimes, just like
Yeah.
a piece of trash blowing
Yeah,
by,
yeah,
and just
yeah.
like bloop, and you're like,
It's funny because it goes to the whole, the suspension of disbelief, and the moment that you recognize something and you see, okay, so that's a movie, it pulls you right out of the
Totally.
story. It's happened to me several times.
sure, yeah.
I give an example. A good friend of mine, you probably know him, Anthony. Anthony Hung is a stunt guy.
Oh yeah.
I can't
Oh,
tell you how
yeah,
many
Anthony.
times I'm watching a movie and then
And you
there's
see him.
Anthony.
Oh wow.
And so I always stop the movie. I'll take a screenshot. And I'll say, "You've ruined it again."
Yeah.
That's funny.
I must have sent him
Well, he's
10 of
good.
them.
He's
very
good.
good. Yeah,
So
very
it's
good.
like he shows up and stuff, and that's
Anthony's a kid that I met in my after school program, Affected. He showed up one day and he was hanging out with some of the other kids in the program. And, I'd never seen him before. So I asked, "Who is that?" And he heard me and he came right over to me. He goes, "Hey, you ever see this?" And he pulled out a quarter and he did this magic trick. And I was just stunned. I'm like, "Wow, that was cool. How'd you do that?" And he goes, "I'll tell you someday." Well, that was in 2004 and he still hasn't told me.
That's funny.
So, from the first minute that I met him, I knew he was a good guy, and I've known him all this time. And he's another kid who's literally been working really hard to get into the industry. And he's finally made it in during his stunt work. He was in Glass. He's been on, I don't know, a dozen television shows. He's been in all kinds of movies. Spencer Confidential. I'm watching that, and there he is sitting at the Mexican restaurant. And I mean, it's just one of those things where I'm always catching him in there in a film. And it's pretty cool because more and more folks from this area are making their way into that industry, both in front and behind the camera. And it's exciting.
It is really cool. We were
I
just
love
talking
it.
about Andrea. Like, I have that same feeling. Like, we would go around to the different film fests, and they were just these little nothing fests, and you're
Yeah.
just fighting to scrap your way into some indie thing. And here she is directing, producing, big pictures.
Amazing.
And it's really cool,
Yeah.
to see the progression.
I remember seeing her credit in a film. I forget which one it was, but she was the line producer, and I was like cheering. I was like, "Oh, that's so cool! That's from right here." Andrea made it. Now,
Yeah.
executive producer. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a big step.
It is,
And I'm pretty sure she knows that a lot of us aspire to be where she is and feel really proud of what she's accomplished. And I know she's not going anywhere. She's just going to keep bringing films here. And I know that she goes where she's needed, but I think her heart is really here, and she'll just continue to bring films back to Worcester, which is fantastic.
Do you
It
think,
is.
do you think
Yeah.
there's any? Is there a bad side to that? Do you think?
Well, I mean, I would imagine that just like any other city, too much of one thing is bad anywhere, and eventually, that welcome mat that exists right now will get a little smaller and smaller. It depends on who it is, what they're doing, what the circumstances are. I've never once heard or know of a single film company that has ever been allowed to use the Worcester Police Department as a backdrop. I mean, we're talking, this is an actual working detective bureau. These are real people, real victims, real crimes, real cases. And, the openness and the welcoming that Hollywood is receiving here is going to continue to keep them coming.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would imagine that most places would just shut the door and say, no, that's not possible. So it's exciting for me because I work there, and I know my office, and it's going to be fun to watch the process, and I'll be the fly on the wall watching everything going on. It's interesting because the city may continue to be very open about certain places and maybe not in others, but I can't see it shutting down for a while. And so yes and no.
Yeah.
Right. So is there a bad side? There's a bad side to everything.
Yeah, I was just because as filmmakers, it's exciting. It's just it's like the shiny object. Oh my God! Like, look, big films, big productions coming to us. But then like, wait, is there?
But then you look at Hollywood and you're
Yeah,
like,
is there
but I
any?
don't want
Are there
that.
any unforeseen things that we're not thinking of? That could be
I'm sure
just a
there are.
question.
I would equate it to the idea of, what if we had a casino in Worcester? Like, wow, it would bring so much, money, but whenever you do things like that, it also brings the bad parts with it. So
Yeah.
there's probably a bad side somewhere, but I'm hoping I never run into it. I want to look on the bright side and hope that we end up with more and more films here, or at least in the area. I mean, Worcester's a pretty cool city. It's the second largest in New England. It has been for a long time. I remember, the old the heartbeat of Massachusetts lines from way back in the day, but I think that's more real, more true today than it's ever been. At least in the film industry, people are flocking here, and that's really, really exciting.
As an officer, did you spend your whole career here or other places too?
No, I was 20 years old when I graduated the academy. I was just a kid. And I've worked my entire law enforcement career in the city. I spent the first 5 years in uniform, and then I worked in what was called a gang intelligence office, and then community services. Shortly after, but then I got the job in the detective bureau, and I've been in the detective bureau for 28 years now.
Wow.
So
You mentioned earlier, and I know this is the case from talking to you over the years, that film and storytelling has been sort of like your creative outlet, and that's been important to you. How long did it take for you, once you became an officer, to start bumping into serious mental challenges with the job and with life and things that you see? And just talk to us a little bit about that process and
Sure.
just some of the things that you've had to experience and deal with over the years.
So I would say that from day one, literally day one at the police department, I started experiencing things that I never imagined I'd ever see. And the unfortunate part of being a police officer is that we get to meet all of the people that most of society wants to pretend doesn't exist. And we have to face it, head on. You can't sidestep it or pretend it isn't real. And I learned very, very quickly what it's like to watch someone die, to deal with a great deal of pain, to watch people go through, hardships and all kinds of terrible things, from addictions to you name it. I mean, violent crime. And so as a young man, I wasn't surprised by any of it because it wasn't that far removed from my reality growing up in the neighborhoods that I grew up in. But to witness it from that perspective was different, where suddenly it wasn't just something that happened in the neighborhood. It was something I was responsible to try to solve, try to figure out what happened. And so those early years, especially in uniform, whenever I saw something that troubled me, I could talk to the guy sitting next to me about it. And usually it was a guy who had more years on, and you give a guy advice, or I would get advice on how to deal with these things. But if my default, whenever something was really, really stressful, was always to turn to something creative. And I would get lost in illustrating or, music production. And so it helped balance a lot of it. But I would think that one of the things that truly stressed me out in my career as a police detective, especially working homicide cases, was always the notification to the family that a child had been murdered. Look, I'm going to miss a lot of things about being a police officer. That's not one of them. That is by far the worst thing I'd ever experienced, to have to tell a mother or father or parents or siblings that their loved one has been killed. There's something about that whole process that has always been part of the way I think about the job. It's always been on the forefront. When a wife loses her husband, she's a widower. When a husband loses his wife, she's a widow and he's a widower. Children lose their parents and they're orphans. But I noticed that there's never been a single word used to describe what it's like to be a parent who loses a child.
Yeah.
And in a society that labels everything, literally everything has a label. This isn't just a table, it's a wooden table.
Right.
You go through the whole thing, everything has a bunch of multiple, over and over and over. Think about it. No language, no culture, at no time in history has ever labeled a parent who loses a child, because it's so incredibly painful and not something people want to ever talk about.
No.
That it's missing. And so I've had to deal with that my whole career, face on, to look in the eyes of a parent and have to tell them your son was shot and killed last night, or your daughter was found dead. It's the worst thing ever. And they show it on TV, and the television actors come in and they just say it, but that's not reality. The reaction from parents varies, and that's where the stress comes in. As a police detective, I always found it painful to be the person to deliver that devastating news, and you carry it out. When it's all said and done, you go in, you're a professional. I'd hold people's hands, I'd hug them, I'd hold them, whatever they needed to do to cry. But then when I would leave, I'd be the guy who most affected, to be in the car with tears in my eyes, going, how much longer do I have to do this? This is no fun.
Right.
I guess Hollywood was just assuming people just did that so much that they became numb to it. Maybe when you watch it and it doesn't feel real.
You can never truly be numb to another person's pain when you have to deal with it in that particular way. So it is something that, for me, that's the greatest stressor. No other part of my job has ever been surprising.
Yeah.
That particular part is never any fun. I know what to expect, but it has never gotten easy to do. It's always been a difficult thing. And creativity is how I've been able to balance that stress. When I feel it, and something at work happens, and we see some pretty terrible things I can't talk about in the podcast, but it's try to imagine all the monsters you've ever imagined in your life and roll them up all into one, and I've seen at least 10 or 20 of them. And it's the only way really for me to balance out those troubling times is to literally fall in to the creative parts and to reach out to people who are creative and want to, do things that are entertaining. That's how I've managed to go 33 years without completely losing my mind. Well, that's debatable. But
it's uncommon though, right? In your line of work.
What's uncommon?
Well, are there a lot of
outlet?
Yeah, are there a lot of other filmmakers in your department?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
photographers or people who like to draw or music producing or anything like that.
I don't know, honestly. I don't think so. I've never been approached by another fellow officer about these projects. I've had guys interested in the work, but no one who's as passionate about it as I do. But I know a lot of guys who have their own outlets. Some guys they love the gym. Some guys will literally, they travel or they do other things. Everybody has some way of dealing and coping with those, those stressors.
Yeah.
For me, it just happens to be the creative side.
Yeah.
It's like film therapy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it a coping process? Is it healing, or is it just something that's just like I can't not do this?
So when I'm looking to actually like escape, what I do is I'd watch a film, and love it or hate it, I'd go back, I'd watch it a second time, but I'd turn the sound off, and this time I would take notes and I would write down, why is the camera moving? I'd ask questions about that. I'd write the title of the film. Why is the camera moving? What did I feel strongly? I know what's happening in the scene, but did the camera movement help me understand what was happening? And just sort of analyzing the film helped me think beyond just the story, writing things down, going through it, and whether it was actually helping or just killing time, either way, it was effective, and it helped me a bunch to get through those tough moments. So usually, if I get home at midnight and I was stressed out, I'd pop the TV on and I'd watch a movie. And even though I'd go to bed late, usually in the morning I would look at my notes and I'd go, wow, what a terrible way of writing that down. And but it was at least something that helped a whole bunch. And still to this day, I mean, I think that my unique perspective on storytelling and filmmaking is something that I'll carry out throughout whatever process comes next. I certainly have a pretty good story base. I mean, if somebody ever wanted to do a crime story, I have a bunch of them. I got a lot of stories to tell.
I was thinking, as you've been talking, all I can think about is the show The Wire, because I know that the creator of that show, I think he was an investigative journalist in Baltimore for years and years and years and years.
Yeah, he had intimate knowledge.
And he saw all the corruption. He saw how it worked from the political level down to the gang level, and how it all connected. And so he's like, I got to tell people this how it works.
So I think having a good basis for any story, having some knowledge, some true knowledge of a subject helps you tell a better story. I mean, I get a kick out of sometimes I watch a movie and they do things wrong and it's silly and it makes me giggle, but I know that that's the way people perceive it. If I say the word doctor to somebody, believe it or not, 9 out of 10 people immediately think man. I mean, there are as many women doctors as there are men, but it's based on your perception. And you're going to think maybe a white lab coat, even though a great deal of doctors don't even wear that anymore. This is the way our brains are trained. You go to the familiar. So, that's kind of where most of what we've been doing is leading. It's like, do we end up making films that cater to what we expect people to do, or do we change something up a little bit? I'm more into the reality based. I'd rather show it the way I've experienced it than to give it the Hollywood treatment and make it feel, oh, that's definitely a crime scene guy. How do I know? He's wearing a crime scene jacket. It says crime scene
there's
unit
the yellow
on it.
tape and then
So there's a lot of things that Hollywood takes its liberties with that are just not real. At least not from my perspective. I've been fortunate that I've worked on a lot of cases with a lot of really intelligent people. I've worked with the guys that I work with in my office are by far, and I'm not saying this because I work there, probably the most dedicated men and women I have ever known in my life. These guys, we often have to give up time with our families to investigate murders of people we've never met, strangers. And no matter how good we do our job, we're criticized for it. And yet we come in and we do it consistently all the way through, regardless of who the victim was. When I look at storytelling from that perspective, I know how much guys are truly affected by what we see. And someday I'm going to be able to apply some of that real world knowledge to a film, an insight into a character, to give a person a much more realistic, rather than the lethal weapon, angry cop who throws everything on the floor and he's crazy. That doesn't exist. That's literally impossible. You know, the bad boys who go out and they get in a shootout every time they go out in their Ferrari. Like, what? It's cool in Hollywood. It's just not real. And so that's usually my approach to almost every story I get involved in, is to take a realistic approach based on my own experience. And usually I get calls about, hey, do you think this sounds right? You know, take a look at the script. Does it feel right to you? If it doesn't, I'll try to help, you know, improve it a little bit. I'll give them my perspective, but I always say, hey, it depends on what your story is and what the goal is, but I can give you my perspective. And I think I have that. I think I've kind of, after 33 years, developed a unique way of looking at filmmaking, especially when it comes to things that deal with law and order.
Yeah. As it relates to law and order in film, and, you know, we were talking about some of the challenges and heartache that goes along with that. But even though that's the case, you find yourself drawn to those kinds of stories because it's what you've experienced?
I actually have. So I'm drawn to stories, I guess. It's not just the law enforcement, right? But there's always seems to be some part or element of that in almost every story I run into. You know, the police show up, or, you know, somebody fires a gun, or some crime happens. It's usually in, like, most of the films.
It's in almost
you know,
everything.
I think it's part of the fabric of our storytelling process. And so I don't always approach a project and think, I want to do a cop story. Not at all. But if I can offer an insight into the reality of how it works, I usually do that. But for me, storytelling is about being diverse and being able to come up with all kinds of things and not simply tell a story about, I mean, do you remember we once talked about that post-apocalyptic concept?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to shoot that.
Yeah, me too.
And there will be no law enforcement in that.
We were just talking about it when we walked in this morning.
So I'm always looking for things like that.
Yeah.
Even that would be the absence of law and order.
Yeah,
And
it's
so,
actually a huge character in the.
So you know, there is always that element, and it's only because I believe that our society has been built on the back of the concept of do unto others, right? So if you look at the 10 Commandments, it's like a blueprint. Like, don't kill each other, don't steal, don't do these things.
Yeah.
And if you look at law is the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Thou shalt not murder. So what's the first crime in Massachusetts 265? One, murder. It's the first one. Don't do that. It's a big no-no.
Yeah.
And so, and you go through, you know, theft, larceny, and all those other things. It's all based on a Christian Judeo value that I grew up, experiencing. So it felt natural to me to want to do the right thing, to protect people from those that would do them harm. It just was a very natural process for me, and to become a policeman didn't feel foreign. My dad, my stepdad, my cousin's two sons. I've got a bunch of law enforcement officers in my family, and so, you know, and a lot of military guys, and so it wasn't an unusual thing for me to do. And I've quite honestly, I've loved it, but it's time for me to do something else.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you had, like, conveying some sort of hope in your art or your stories is, like, comes natural to you. Is that kind of tied in with the way you were raised, or is that a direct result of seeing and experiencing a lot of this horrific stuff?
I think it's a combination of both things. For example, a lot of the stories that I have put out, a lot of the projects that I've worked on, music videos, they all have I would say, positive feel, even though we've highlighted some of the terrible things that happen. There's always a message at the end of hope, a good outcome in some way or another. I don't candy coat things. If one of the project involves gunfire or shooting or death, then it's in there. But I try to find a way of telling a story that leaves somebody with an understanding of why. But not always. You know, I really try to focus on giving a good message, and it is something that's part of who I am. I guess the only way I can explain it is I know my mother planted that seed in me. Watch your tongue, be careful what you say, be careful what you do, be careful of how you treat people fairly, be honest. Those things are things that I heard my whole life. Yeah. And so it's a message that is part of who I am, and it's reflected in my work. I have occasionally been on the creative side where I've shown things and I've worked on projects that didn't necessarily have a happy ending. I'm working on one right now that happens to be pretty twisted, but it's an idea that was born from the work that I've done for 33 years. And I wanted to explore that other side, and I wanted to really sort of write in some of the things that I've learned in my career as a police officer.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. I guess I was interested in that because you were saying, in one hand, having conveying the sense of hope comes natural, but then I want to make stories that are very realistic and not candy coat and make them true to life. And it's like all the things that you've experienced that you can't even really get into, and what I'm imagining, I'm like, how do you have both? How do you tell a story that's realistic in these horrors of life and then still have hope? And it's almost I guess, it's seems like such a personal, individual thing. Sometimes I watch movies and they're able to pull it off somehow, right?
Yeah.
Just have both where you're wow, I feel like there was a sense of hope, but it's not overboard and feels like spoon feeding you or being this is how you should feel, right?
Sure.
It is, but it's sometimes really subtle. That's something I'm always interested in because I think I'm more addicted almost to this ambiguous, you have to think about it and stew on it type of ending in a story.
Right, where it allows you to make up your own mind.
Yeah, where
what's good,
if something's blatantly hopeful, I go, eh.
Yeah, it's a little too corny and it ends in the happy tone.
Yeah,
with the, chimes and everything. Right. Everybody's like, oh, thanks.
But I'm like, well, that might just be something wrong with me.
No,
I'm curious.
No, there's definitely.
I'm curious how you.
No, you're obviously you're sophisticated and you don't want to be spoon fed. That's what that is, and I understand that. I've had a couple of ideas that I wanted to really make into a film, but I had to be very careful in how I crafted it, only because it's based on real events, and so everybody's name had to be changed, and locations and things like that, so that I wouldn't violate any of the trust that's been placed in me with specific cases. I mean, these are real folks, these are real people, real victims. And so all I do is I use my memories rather than anything. It's no official reports that I take copies of or anything like that. It's just from my own experience. Yeah. And I'll formulate an idea and I'll write it out as best I can. And in this particular case, I'm working on a film right now that happened to be, the concept is maybe 10 years old. It sat around that long. I just wasn't ready.
Yeah,
it wasn't time for me to draw it out, and it wasn't until recently that I reached out. You guys know the guys from Fat Foot Films?
Recently met them. Yeah,
Ed Gutierrez and Ryan Convery. They do a lot of funny stuff, and I watched a couple of their shorts, and they made me giggle. One of them features a good friend of mine, Mike Ziccola, and it was about a ghost in a bathtub, and it was just what a silly concept. I thought it's such a strange title. And then I watched it, and of course, I laughed. And so I said, these guys, they're doing some fun stuff here. And I reached out, and I spoke to Ed for a while, and I said, hey, we should make something together. This is COVID has kept everybody caged for a year, right? And so, of course, he was like, dude, I've been trying to get hold of you, and let's make something. So it was really exciting. And we met in Shrewsbury. We sat down to have something to eat. And within the first 2 minutes, I knew I could work with these guys. They were fun. They were enthusiastic. They were excited about it. And I said, this could work. This could really work. So Ed said to me, you got a script? And I went, no.
Give me 24 hours.
I said, let me scratch something out and I'll get back to you. So that's exactly what I did. I went home and I grabbed all my notes and, in bulleted form. And I said, so this is sort of the concept. This is what I want to do, but I'd have to write it out. And he mentioned a good friend of his, Dennis Nato, who's a writer. He's a school teacher from New Hampshire. So I sent them my idea. It was a 1-page, very poorly written concept. And I said, I need to formulate this into a script somehow. And so Dennis took it and mangled it and deleted like 90% of the garbage I wrote and put it back together. And so we went back and forth for a few revisions, and I added lines and he changed things, and we talked about motivations and plot and all that good stuff. And so by the time it came back to me in a script format, I was so pleased with what I was reading. I was like, I started visualizing it already. I was like, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be fantastic. We went through a few more revisions and dialogue after we read through it and we did our auditions, but we finally have a shooting script. And I'm so excited to get started on that. Our first day of principal photography is July 24th.
Wow.
And it's the main scene it's literally the backbone for the movie. We needed an apartment, and I couldn't find the one that fit what was in my mind's eye, so we built it.
Wow.
We actually built the set, and we're going to pre-light pretty soon, but I would say it's probably 85% done. All the walls are up, the windows, kitchen, the bathroom, everything is in. Initially, I thought New York City apartment, but then I realized New York City, that's so yesterday. It's a Worcester apartment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is where filmmaking is happening, and so it'll feature iconic Worcester landmarks.
Nice.
The backdrop is a Worcester story.
Where'd you build the apartment?
So we have, I'm working with Dan Diaz over at Westerman's Prop House. Dan and I started Central Mass Film Studios, and currently we have a 22,000 square foot facility that's open to us.
Wow.
And I can't share specifically where right now because we're still working on some details with the owner of the building. But the space has allowed us to take our time building the set. There's plenty of space for us to make this thing in. The ceilings are very high, so we're going to high mount all of our lights. It's a 360 set. So once we put a camera in there won't be any need to move crew or anything else. It's going to be cameraman, and even the first assistant camera will be outside the set monitoring outside, and it'll be actors and a cameraman, which will give us some really dynamic movements in camera or some flexibility to do that. And of course, I like everything over the top, so that's how I'll do it.
Are you directing?
Yes. Yeah.
Not DPing?
I'm both, believe it or not. Yeah. So, but as a director of photography, for me, the process is more about the visual storytelling. This film is designed to show more than tell. I really want to do some really cool shots with the city and, highlight certain areas that I think are important for the story, and they fit really well. And, I think I'm going to stop apologizing for the fact that it's Worcester and start to really promote it. Because before it was like, well, we'll make this look like New York, or it's more Boston, or I really want to show that it's actually Worcester. And our set it'll scream, 3-decker. It's going to feel like one of Worcester's typical apartments.
Nice.
And I'm excited about that because I think it's cool. Worcester has so many really awesome things in it that we should highlight it.
Yeah.
That's what I plan to do with this project.
That was kind of a fun fact that surprised me about Honest Thief. Andrea told us that they built the FBI office and the hotel in a building here in Worcester. Thought that was super cool. I had no idea.
Yeah, so I remember the first time seeing something transform for a film, something I was familiar with. They shot the movie Surrogates here. Bruce Willis was in that. And that came after American Hustle. It was one of those movies that followed up. But the FBI office was the old courthouse. And courtroom 14 on the top floor I testified in that space. I've seen it a million times. When I walked in there, I was like, whoa, it was so cool. So behind the judge's desk, up in the back was like a Commonwealth of Massachusetts symbol. And there was a clock in one corner, and then you had the jury sat on one side and the public, and then there was a part where the prosecutor and the defense attorney sat. And walking in there and seeing a gigantic, like a 12-foot FBI symbol on it, excuse me, and seeing all of the chairs gone and seeing working desks and filing cabinets and, of course, the film camera stuff. I mean, I was like, oh, Bruce Willis was like 20 feet from me, and I'm like, oh, look at the lens on that camera. That's me. I'm a gear nut.
Yeah.
Was such an exciting experience, and it really just goes to show that that's the magic of filmmaking. It's like if you can convince someone that what they're looking at is real and it exists, and I mean that's part of the process. But seeing something that I was familiar with change, and then to see it in the movie was like so cool. The FBI special agent in charge, his office was a judge's office, and I'd been in there a few times, and looking out the window and seeing the memorial auditorium, like, okay, this is cool. You know, even though it was distracting when I first saw the movie, going back and watching it again, going, I like the way they did this. This is really neat. And it's happening more and more all over the place here.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I want to be a part of it. If anybody's going to watch this, if you guys out there, I'm available. Let me know. I can make a good coffee, whatever you want.
You can do a lot more than that. You were talking about drawing earlier, and I didn't actually know that you could sketch as well as you do until we worked on that short film, Joseph, and you did all the previs on that and delivered storyboards. And I was just like, what? Yeah. It's beautiful.
Thanks.
I'm saying it so the editors will put it in and show it right here in the podcast, but we'll show some of your work. It's awesome.
Editors should get some of your like VFX stuff that you've done, because I see you post some of that. A lot of like sci-fi space stuff that you've done is really cool.
Seems like love sci-fi. Just an extension of your drawing.
I would say that yeah. So I mean, when it comes to computers and animation and illustration, filmmaking, music, I mean, any kind of performing art or expressive art is something that I've explored. It's just part of who I am. And right now, I mean, my sole focus has, I would say the last few years have really been filmmaking, understanding the technology, even theory. I've met some pretty incredibly talented folks over the years, some world famous people, some people who are making big budget projects, but nothing has been more impressive than watching a guy who owns nothing and has no money make something that I like watching.
Yeah.
And so that's why whenever somebody comes to me and says, hey, can I rent your lights? And I want to know who they are and where they come from and what they do. And if it's somebody who's struggling, who's coming up, I just give it to them.
Yeah.
I don't charge them because, if I feel like I'm contributing back to something that I love so much, and watching someone else grow makes me feel good. I like to watch someone else make something that's fantastic. And of course I get inspired by that enthusiasm and by the raw talent. Most of us have usually been, we've been in those situations where you have an idea, you want to create something, but you don't have the means. Maybe you don't have the equipment, you don't have the money, you don't have the access or whatever it is. It doesn't mean you couldn't, because I think if we lined up access and budget for a lot of local folks, we could make some pretty amazing things.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to meet a lot of talented people, but I gravitate towards the indie filmmaker, the guy struggling to get it done, because someday the door will open up, and when they walk in, they'll be able to appreciate all the small things, all the nuances of what it takes to really be at the bottom of that pyramid, grinding to try to get somewhere.
Yeah.
I love that part of it.
When you focus on making your stories, I know this about you. You focus on what is going to go on the screen, and you've done a really good job stretching money over time.
I'm the master.
You are the master.
I take $1 and I turn it into $100 in production value. Absolutely.
I was surprised to hear that when you said that you were building a set, because you've had such good access to everything around, but you must have had something specific in your mind.
I did. I had something specific, and there's a part of the script that calls for the set to be built as well. There's a couple of things that I won't share right now.
Yeah, it's fine.
That are part of the story that would make it very difficult to accomplish if we actually use someone's house. So it wouldn't work. So right from the start, I said, okay, I've got to build this set, and I've now got to figure out what it's going to cost to make it. The cost of lumber right now is just outrageous, but we managed to build a 24 by 24 apartment with a hallway. It's completely furnished. It has a kitchen and a bathroom and a bedroom and living room and all the nice things that come with it. We have, flooring and carpeting. And if you walk in there, especially from the perspective of a camera, you will not be able to tell that it's a set.
Wow.
Other than the obvious lighting, because
Yeah.
every film set is lit beautifully. And I mean, I wish my house looked like that when I walked in. 3-point lighting everywhere, like, oh, look at the fill on his face. It looks great.
Is it completely roofless? So you have
Completely roofless. So the walls are 9 feet tall. The ceilings in there are about 14 feet high. So we've mounted, all of our gear up top, and the lighting is all top down. So it'll be pretty nice.
I'm always impressed when you find out certain films or locations are built when they look like totally practical.
Yeah,
That's
look
always
real.
impressive. I was watching the behind the scenes this morning actually of Fight Club.
Mm-hmm.
I watched that last night, and I just realized I hadn't seen it in years. And it seems obvious, I guess, but I never realized that they built that Paper Street house.
Yeah.
And everything about it was all custom made and made to look old and raggedy. And it was funny because we're talking about Worcester apartments and everything. It just looks like a Worcester 3-decker.
Yep.
It
does, like an old house
LA.
in Maine South somewhere, and like a long forgotten.
And I think that's why in my head I was just like, oh well, that was just an old house that was sitting there, and they shot there. It's like, no, they built it very specifically. Yeah. It's just funny because
so I
come to Worcester, you're gonna pick one up.
I had a very similar idea. So I mean, I would say that the look of Fight Club is something that I've always liked. It's gritty, it's dark,
it's green and yellow,
contrasty. Like that.
Yeah.
I've always loved that look.
Yeah.
And I would say that my film will have some of that in it, only because it inspired me to sort of create that gritty environment. And this particular film, it's called Mercy, and it happens to have that same feel. So the protagonist in my film is someone who struggles through her daily life. It's pretty mundane. There's nothing remarkable about her at all, but she faces some challenges, and in the process of facing those challenges, she sort of reveals who she truly is. And so the film is dark. I wouldn't say that in this particular storyline there's a positive ending or a happy ending or something hopeful, but overall, what I'm hoping to do with this project is to create a series. And this would be the very first. This is the introduction of the character and the troubles that she faces. And if I'm lucky enough to make a second or a third episode, you would then get the backstory, and you would see that there is a redeemable quality. But initially, when you're introduced to her, you're introduced to the chaos of the world that she lives in.
Yeah. I'm interested.
Yeah,
I want to know more.
Yeah, what's your timeline on it, do you think?
So, well, I would say that sometime before the end of September, we'll be finished shooting. And shortly thereafter, first draft. And I would be happy to let you guys preview it before anybody sees it.
I'd love
course,
that.
Viewing party.
Get your feedback. I'm pretty open. I'm the type of filmmaker that I trust other filmmakers' opinions, even though everybody has one, right? We all would have done things differently, but I take the perspective of, here, let me show you what I have. If there's anything specifically that you think is really out of place or just seems odd to you, I don't mind you telling me what it is, as long as you can explain it. An example, I had one time, I did some VFX work for a friend of mine on a film, and he asked his friend about it, and his friend's reaction was, I hate it. It's terrible. That's awful. It doesn't look real.
Great. Thanks for your help.
Well, there was nothing constructive in it. And so then I asked my buddy, do you mind if I call him? And I just want to know why he said that. So I called him up, and it turns out he knew nothing about VFX.
Yeah.
And it was funny because it was gunfire, some gun scene that they did. He'd never fired a gun in his life. He has no idea what they actually look like or work like. Yet he had this opinion that what I did didn't look right. So rather than sort of chastising him and saying, you don't know what you're talking about, I said, hey, I have an idea. You want to come to the range with me next week so you can see what it really looks like? And he goes, you do that? I'm like, sure, come on out. I said, you'll love it. It's pretty cool. I said, I'll make you wear, ear protection, but I want you to feel what it's like to actually fire a gun.
Yeah.
It changed his mind completely. He came out we went out, we went through maybe 150 rounds or so. I let him fire a bunch of them. And that was the end of the whole, that doesn't look real.
I thought you were going to say you shot him.
Well, I wanted to.
Rather than chastise him.
That was, he showed up, shot him. No, it was one of those moments I took an opportunity to teach rather than to make fun of him. He truly wanted to help, but he just didn't know what he was talking about.
I think that's key, especially in this whole filmmaking. I mean, it's key everywhere, right, in all of life. But I specifically notice that in filmmaking, there's just so much ego.
Yeah.
In the normal sort of system, and even a lot of the indie stuff, it's I don't know why it's so much there. Where it's it's like there are a lot of moving parts, and so there's that's challenging.
Sure.
And then you have a vision, and you think you see what But you speak to some directors or writers or whatever, or even producers who. It's almost like I don't understand how they recruited other than just paying people.
Yeah.
Because it would be really hard to work on their sets, you know?
Well, you just answered it. Yeah, paying
right?
people.
I mean, and that's and people are just so drawn to the industry that they'll do it and they'll just eat crap.
Yeah.
For a little while.
So I can tell you, I've turned jobs down, even though they pay well. I can think of 2 nationally, maybe internationally recognized music stars that I've said no to. And it's only because our messages don't align. I don't like the way you treat people. I don't like the things you say. I don't like what your music talks about. So the answer is no from me. And I had one particular artist, very, very well known. This guy's been in the industry a long time. He was so upset because I said I didn't want to work on his video that he said, I'll throw so much money on the table, you won't know what to do with it. And it sort of gave me this, it was a sort of a light bulb moment where I was like, this guy has no idea who I am. And so I said to him, with all due respect, you don't have enough money for me to compromise my integrity. You just don't have enough. I know the guy's a millionaire, he's a multimillionaire, but I would never sell out in order to collect cash because I don't gain anything from it. It's money, great. There's other ways to make it.
He's trying to become a billionaire because he thinks that you just need $1 billion.
Yeah, exactly. So
you don't have enough. Well, I'm a millionaire. What's the next step?
that side of that creative arrogance, where it's either money or they believe that they're always correct. It's not something I just don't feel comfortable with. I like working with people who are open-minded, and I don't mind opinions. I'll ask people, "What do you think?" I'm an open-minded guy when it comes to creativity, and whatever helps to make the project better, I'm open to. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'll say, "Wow, that's a great idea. That's so much better than what I thought." And I work with a lot of folks that they're not afraid to offer that opinion because they know that I'm not going to instantly reject them, or I'm not going to go, put on my director's hat and throw the scarf over my shoulder and say that's ridiculous. No, I'm open. You have
the best teams can synergize. You want to get stuff from your team.
Absolutely, and it as a matter of fact, it happened this morning. I thought my script was written and we was done, and then I got one of those calls from Ryan. Hey, I've got this great idea. I was thinking about the edit, and I couldn't write it down fast enough. So I immediately went into the script and I added those lines and I added a couple of changes in the visual effects. And I sent the script right back to him. I was like, "Hey, it's in there now. This is a great idea." I could have just said, "Well, I came up with that," but I didn't. It wasn't me. And I think that it really furthers the story, and it actually makes it easier for us to deliver a message without anything complicated. So that's why I thought it was brilliant. Just the moment popped into his head, and I wrote it down. I said, "That's perfect." Some people, like you said, don't have that ability. They immediately shut themselves off. The wall goes up if you criticize anything that they do. It's counterproductive. If you're one of the big ones and one of the greats, and some 24-year-old kid comes up and goes, "Hey, I just got out of school. You know what you should do?" I can see a Spielberg going, "Thanks, kid. That's great. Appreciate it," and then ignoring him. But I'm not a Spielberg. I'm just Dan Rosario, and I like helping people. I like when they help me, and I'm always open to ideas. And who knows, maybe someday, God willing, I'll make a feature film, and I'll be able to pull in all the people that I've worked with all along. I mean, so many talented people in this city. And that's my goal, is to
Yeah.
eventually get to that point where we can make a film and we don't have to worry about Hollywood's tax credit where they have to hire a certain number of people from Massachusetts. I'd love to be able to say, hey, it was conceived here, written here, produced here by people that live here and know this area. I'd love to be able to do that someday. I quite honestly believe it's coming.
Yeah, us too.
I have a bunch of
Great.
locations. My roommate, who's also a aspiring writer and filmmaker, we were talking about this recently. Now there's certain locations in Worcester that we've like made note of or taking pictures of, and we're like, yeah, I have scenes that are like written that are like that's the location because it's sort of this cool little hidden gem that is uniquely Worcester. You know, it has a lot of spots like that.
I have a spot that I shot a film in 2 years ago. It went through the film festival circuit, never got released publicly. I was the DP on the job, and the writer-director just didn't want to release it publicly. I don't know why, but there was a scene. It was a post-apocalyptic film, and it was the extremes. So you had the poor folks and those that had. And the ones that had everything. There was a head of a company that made food that had a very, like a big office on the top of a building. And I thought, okay, how do I get a vast space that looks ridiculous? Like, who would have an office that big? It looks, like that would, everybody would go, oh my God, that's so opulent. I tried to imagine a place in the city, and I couldn't think of anything. And I remember sitting in my office looking out the window, and I just looked straight ahead and I went, oh, the Memorial Auditorium. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the front part of the Memorial Auditorium.
Never.
It's unbelievable. So, even when they were doing graduations there, hardly anybody had access to it. But if you go up, if you look at the Memorial Auditorium, you see those 4 gigantic windows in the front. There's an entire marble foyer. It's probably as wide as the building, and it's got to be at least 60 feet up. It's unbelievable. And so, of course, I made a few calls, and I found out I'm the first film company to ever actually be allowed to film in there. And we went in for an afternoon, and we shot this scene with this man who now ruled the world in this gigantic office. And we went out of our way to give him a gold tie, like a solid. There are people starving outside, and he's got this shiny suit and a really cool gold tie. And using some visual effects, we added some gold statues in the space. But you'd never guess that was made here. Never. That one visual effect shot, everybody asked me about it. Everybody who saw the film was like, where'd you make that? Where is that? What, and it's a little hidden gem, and it's right there. Yeah. And someone else is going to make something, and it'll go out before mine does. But it's a pretty good, and so anybody who's watching, stay out of my space.
Dan was here first.
Yeah, me first. I will show a date. I got proof.
That's funny.
So, and I've actually shot at the old courthouse as well. I mean, when it was shut down and abandoned, the front part that is now an apartment building, I used that hallway, and so I've had a lot of access to a lot of places here. Like you said, there are a lot of hidden gems, a lot of places to explore, some really cool spots.
Yeah.
So
That's how you stretch a buck too.
Yep.
Talking about that earlier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we talk a lot about the power of storytelling and how it's something that's in us. It's just sort of just there from birth, like our need for story as humans. So this is kind of philosophical, or just looking inward and trying to always figuring out with our guests and friends a little bit more about why that is. And I often like to say that it's kind of like breathing. We're always thinking in story, whether it's our memories or our dreams or what happened yesterday, what it doesn't, or what we plan to do tomorrow. It's always there, but it's kind of like breathing in that we are always doing that, but we don't think about it.
Yeah.
What do you believe we can do intentionally using story, other than the big things like, hey, make movies or make shows or whatever? What when you think about the power of story, what comes to your mind?
I've always seen storytelling as the most effective vehicle for delivering a message. whatever that message may be to the filmmaker, there's something that captivates an audience when they identify with a character or a moment or situation or even an environment. I love nature. I love being out in the mountains, and I love, being out in the woods. And so whenever I see a scene like that, it literally draws me in, pulls me in. I'm like, oh, I wish I could be there. One of these days, I know you've been there a lot. I'd love to visit Montana, right? So I remember the first time I saw the wilderness and the mountains, and I thought, okay, places to go, right? So something as simple as seeing a mountain view motivated me to want to be there. And storytelling is very similar, whether it be a message or whatever it is. I grew up in a household where my mom, my dad were always telling me stories. They happened to be biblical stories, and those particular stories, my imagination, I would picture, the environments and the people, and there was always a message, in there. Even though as a kid I may not have understood all of it, but they didn't have a problem explaining those stories. As I grew older, I could hear the story and I could discern my own message from it. And I guess it's built in. It's like when I tell a story, I'm sending a message. And, if my audience captures the message that I'm trying to send, then I feel like I've accomplished what I set out to do. Sometimes the message isn't always clear, or sometimes the message, as we talked earlier, isn't always a positive one. But the way to know for sure if you're effective is to ask the audience afterwards, or ask the viewer, what did you get from it? And I do that a lot. And sometimes people think it's a little weird. I may ask things that, didn't see. Hey, if he wasn't in that scene, or what do you think happened after he left? And they'll go, well, but I didn't see him leave. I know, but if he did and he was outside, what do you think would have gone on? And I always look for that, the deeper meaning in the story. And so when I approach storytelling, it isn't just that moment. I want to know what they feel when it's over. What happens when the movie's done? What do you get from that story? Was it a lasting impression? Did I do a good job? Was it confusing? Because I wonder if I failed as well. How do I approach this the next time around to do a better job? So there's always that element. There's a message being sent in whatever project I work on, and its effectiveness for me is not only whether or not people say, hey, that was pretty good. I've had people say, oh, I loved it. It was awesome. But I want to know what you really feel. Let's talk about it. Call me later, and I want to know exactly what you thought about my character.
Do you mean like the breakdown between, or the dichotomy between it was entertaining and what they got from it as like a message?
Yeah, so the entertainment is one thing. But, for me, there's always a much deeper part of it. What motivated me to write this story? What motivated me to shoot this the way I did? And I'm always hoping that someone can see my motivation in creating something that way. And it isn't always at face value. Sometimes you have to talk about it a little more. But, hopefully they're entertaining. That's kind of the point.
It seems like our favorite work, if we look back, it seems to be when it's entertaining and has a very important message.
Yep.
It seems like if you have one without the other, it's always a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can get a bunch of, like, if you wanted to do a gun battle, you can have like 100 guns shooting back and forth. But what's the point?
Yeah.
Who's the hero and what happens at the end, right? And if there is no point, then it's just a gun battle and it's boring.
Or if they get the balance off, because I watched a movie last night. Oh, so bad. Tomorrow War with Chris Pratt. It's on Amazon Original.
I don't know it.
I haven't seen it.
So I'm not gonna go the whole thing, but I like Chris Pratt, and I was like, I'll watch it. Look, it's an alien / time travel movie.
Okay.
And
Two of my favorite subjects.
Right, and I'm like, you can't go wrong. So the concept is 30 years from now, aliens invade, and humanity is nearly wiped out, but clearly they've invented time travel, so they shoot back in time 30 years and ask present day to us humans, hey, we're dying, we need you to come back to the future with us and help us fight this war. Mm-hmm. Super cool kind of concept, but the problem with it was that the entire movie was just a big climate change agenda thing, and it was so heavy-handed that like the whole time I feel like I'm just getting hit over the head with the climate change agenda, and I'm like, I want to just enjoy the movie. And that's therein lies the key, right? If you actually want your message to be effective, you got to let your audience get to it on their own.
Right.
Because I thought I was just being spoon fed. Like, yeah, I get it. The ice is melting. Like, it's just like, I don't,
Right.
That's the true art. I think that right there is the true art. I mean, there's craft, of course, the craft of, how does it look? How is it lit? How's the audio and all that? But the true art to me feels like leading people on a journey with some breadcrumbs, but don't shove the cheese in their face at the end, right?
Yeah, it was.
That's like the whole point of telling a story. If someone asks you a question and you want them to think for themselves, you're going to tell them a story and leave them with that, and they go, "Well, you didn't answer my question." Wait,
Well, you know who?
Or did you?
Jesus was the master of it, right?
Yeah, he never answered anything.
He just gave parables. He just told a story, and then they were left to go, "Oh."
Actually, that's a great editing trick and a writing trick. I had a professional writer give me notes on my first script, and he's like, "You're answering all of your questions." And I was like, "Well, what? What's wrong with that?" And then I got to the edit and started editing, and I'm like, "Oh, it's so true." Like the best in dialogue, so often when questions are asked, the scene will change.
Yep.
Yeah, and you also don't want to insult your audience as if they can't think for themselves or figure it out. But I think about your story that you just told about the guy, the critic about the gunfire and the VFX of the gun. You took the time to tell him a story. You went and met up with him, and you basically showed him this is how a gun works.
Sure.
And along that, there was probably a lot of other stories like, this is who I am. I'm a good guy. That was all, that was a real world interaction, but it was the equivalent of telling an effective story, because what it did was it changed his perspective. It gave him context that gave him a new understanding. Yep. And that, to me personally, is, I think, the highest form of what a story can do. Is it can create empathy and change a perspective, change the way someone thinks about something, for the better or for the worst. I think stories are like technology or anything else, where they're not inherently good or bad. They're a tool that can be used for good or bad. And so that, to me, is what I think of. Like, if I want to do something with storytelling, it's I want to give people something that gives them a new understanding, a deeper level of understanding and empathy, so that they can become better people, that they can be more understanding and empathetic people.
Well, building on that idea, people often, when they hear the word antagonist, they often think villain.
Right.
But an antagonist in the story is not necessarily the villain or a villain. It's just someone who's resisting the protagonist.
Exactly.
They have a different agenda.
Yep.
In that little story about the dude with the gunfire, he was an antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the most powerful stories of all time is when over the story, the protagonist takes an antagonist and turns them into an ally.
Sure. And I think it's part of the storytelling process, really the motivator. So you have your protagonist who is suddenly challenged by this person in some way. It motivates them to continue on the mission, whether they're purposely an obstacle or the enemy, if you will, or they're just simply someone who doesn't believe in them. You see it in all the sports stories, right? And when anything that has to do with the team who's facing the challenges, and they're sort of like misfits, and they sort of mishmash them together, and next thing you know, they're champions, right? There's always that other team, right? Mm-hmm. The team that's really well put together, and they have all the great gear, and they show up in this really cool van, and these guys are showing up in an old school bus that's falling apart. You have that challenge at some point. It's what makes us grow as people. Like you when you face adversity, you have one of two choices. You either face it full on and you grow and you fight harder, or you quit. Nobody wants to see a story about a quitter, right? Nobody goes like, "Oh, that movie was so cool. Remember what the first 2 minutes when he quit?"
That's a tragedy.
Yeah. Nobody watches those and goes, "That was great." It's facing the adversity, the challenges, and the antagonist is so important in that storyline. It's so important for the motivation to see your character grow. They're challenged by the difficulty or the bad person, or the literally the villain, or whatever it may be, to step out of themselves and to grow. And I love stuff like that. You see it all the time. It's almost part of almost every story. There is a meaning behind someone's effort to be better. And And I love that stuff. I mean, without it, can you imagine doing a film about a guy who wins all day long, all the time, with no chance of anybody ever challenging him? Who's going to watch that?
That's why Superman's the worst hero.
it's like really?
Always wins.
You know,
Well,
he
that's
always
why
wins.
they had to develop
Kryptonite.
Yeah.
It's just like
Conversely, or maybe not conversely, but a slightly different angle. What I've been wrestling with lately are these, it seems to be very in vogue, are stories about the villain. And the villain, they're not trying to make the villain, they're not trying to make the villain look good. It's just that the character that we follow as a hero or a protagonist in the story is the villain.
Yeah.
And you go through the entire emotional arc of the story and find yourself wondering if your emotions really should have been manipulated, or were they manipulated? We talked about this a little bit with Andrea, because that movie I Care a Lot is like basically about two villains, or this new Disney movie Cruella.
Yes. Well, you're literally, she's the villain, but you're rooting for her.
Right.
It's sort of like the heist films, right? It's that same feeling. So you go, okay, so these 5 thieves are getting together to break into this bank to steal these diamonds, and you want
you're
them to
rooting
do it.
for the crime.
To do it, yeah.
You're like, oh, that's so cool. Look at how they avoided security.
Stupid cops.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
fooled
Like,
them.
oh my God, I like those guys are so dumb. It is one of those things. It's a different type of storytelling, and this is when I mentioned earlier that oftentimes when I look at the way I tell stories, I like to take the opposite approach. And in this particular film that I'm working on now, Mercy, it's exactly that. The antagonist is the hero of my story, at least in the first episode.
Oh, by the way, I wasn't picking on your story.
No, that's okay. But I did
just
take
so you
that
didn't
approach.
think I was.
No. But I kind of feel like you were setting that up.
No, I swear to God, I wasn't. I was just thinking about this thing lately.
Quick pass under the basket.
Here you go. Take it or don't.
Yeah. So
we had a whole episode about the concept of the anti-hero and like what if it's that's where like stories are headed, like if you're going to be able to have the classic good versus evil anymore. And I mean, it is more interesting to watch someone make horrible choices. It's just, you're like, because you kind of wonder in the back of your head, if I was just the most impulsive, like just hateful version of myself that exists somewhere in there, what would my life look like? Right. And that you get to play that out. Seeing the protagonist turn into the antagonist is so much more interesting than seeing the protagonist, hit rock bottom and then climb the ladder to victory. It's like, in some stories, it's like that's fascinating. And then you get to actually see, okay, this facing that sort of darkness that might be like scary or so unfamiliar is like cathartic and helpful.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think it's like tragedy porn, where some people, they're just like, it just drag you through the mud and then beat you up and then
Don't Google that at home.
You know what I mean?
Well, that's not great either. But I mean, like, where I've landed on is like, I don't mind the fantasy of, it's the same as like Grand Theft Auto, right? You're playing this game. You're fantasizing about being the villain. In these other films, you're following the villain as if they're the hero or something. I don't mind that fantasy, so that it will lure you in. What I don't like is that I appreciate like Breaking Bad, where it just took me further and further, deeper and darker down the hole, where I'm just like, no, there's nothing redemptive about that. And that's the point.
Right. That was the point. This was a man who
That,
lost himself.
to me,
into that.
has great value.
Yeah.
Cautionary.
Yeah.
It's a cautionary tale.
Sure.
Yeah. To me, that's the point of allowing that fantasy. If it goes the other way, the flip side, here, have this fantasy, and the overall message in the end was, that's okay. That has value. These things that this evil person are doing, we rooted for them. They did it. That, to me, that's just like, that should be, in my opinion, like it should be looked at as low-hanging fruit, like art that's just like basic. To me, that doesn't...
Should be illegal.
I'm wondering what a good example, because I mean, we've all seen, I think, good and bad examples of what we're talking about.
Sure.
In regards to like the morally ambiguous main character, you know.
Yeah, I can't.
Or even just more straight up evil main character. Like I think that was our qualms with I Care a Lot, was that it wasn't really exploring. It didn't feel like an unbiased viewpoint of exploring the darkness. It felt like a very heavy-handed, weird spoon-feeding, confusing tone of like heroic badassness. Even though it was not that, and it was very confusing in that way.
That's deep.
So,
wow, that's a deep way. I can tell you when I watch a film, if it doesn't capture me in the first 10 minutes, I don't finish it.
oh, that's
Someone has to force me to.
It's a good.
I've
thing
never
to
seen
do.
that movie. By the way,
I've pushed myself through films just for the sake of like, well, I gotta stick this out. I gotta finish it to see what I'm left with. But in the first 10 minutes, I knew I didn't want to finish it, and now I'm a little more picky. Where I'm like, you better grab me in the first like 10, 20 minutes. Otherwise, it's like, you know what?
Yeah. Otherwise, I'm out. Next.
Yeah. I mean, I think more movies now have that first scene that's really gonna like grip you. You know,
draws you right in.
I wanted to ask you, and this might lead into a whole thing maybe off the podcast.
Oh, is this the part when we talk about Tenet?
No.
Every podcast.
No, I watched a movie actually Sunday night that, and we were supposed to have the podcast, or Monday night we were supposed to have the podcast on Tuesday, and it was crazy because it was right before we were going to talk to you, and I got really excited because I wanted to ask you about it. If you've seen the movie Dragged Across Concrete.
No.
Because it's with Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn, and they play two cops who get, I mean, not really spoilers, but like they basically get kicked off the force for a time, or but I don't know what you would call it when you're on a hiatus. Suspended.
Yeah. They did something silly. They get suspended.
Yeah, and I would just be curious to know your thoughts on it. And to me, it was a really, really interesting example of some of the things we're talking about, where it feels very true to that world, but I don't really know if it is, right? Because I'm watching it like, wow, this is really impressive, but like it's very obviously just like the writer's vision, and it's very hard to pin down who you're supposed to quote root for. There's sort of semi-crooked cops who you really love in some way, and I think a lot of people would probably hate right off the bat in the movie. And then there's a criminal who just gets out of jail and immediately is setting up for his next thing. And he's sort of the protagonist in a way. Yeah. And Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn's characters are sort of the protagonist. And it's just really interesting, sort of Pulp Fiction-ish type of way of blending all these perspectives and these stories together at the end. There's even a little segment with sort of an innocent bystander, and it goes into her story, and it's basically just like a stab in the heart sort of thing.
What's it called again?
Dragged Across Concrete.
I'll have to watch it.
Pretty brutal title, but
what year?
2018.
Oh yeah, not too long ago.
It honestly it's been the first time in a long time that I've been left, like, sometimes I watch a movie and I'm like, that was so amazing, but then I never think about it anymore. And that's, I think, part of why the closure, the clean buttoned up ending bugs me sometimes, is because I go, oh yeah, cool, I get it, and then I never think about it again. This, I was like, that was, wow, okay, and like I didn't know what to think, and then the next day I was like telling everyone here about it. I was like, oh my god, and it's like it like blew my mind, and I can't get it out of my head. Like it's something about that movie.
And you had questions about whether or not parts of it were real, if it really happened that way, or if
no. I just felt like it's been a while since I've seen a movie that has the classic cop and criminal, and we're following, and we're following them both, where it felt like not Hollywoodized, like, at all. It felt realistic. The dialogue was like high quality. It was like almost a 3-hour movie. It took its time, very like patient, kind of like segments that I think some people might just think are boring. I was like so drawn into it. Lots of just beautiful kind of neo-noir, like insane lighting. Every frame is like a poster. Like just gorgeous.
Now I have to watch this.
And but it's just funny because it's like, yeah, it's just these, I'll say, interesting
Well, I'm going to watch it, and then we'll talk about it.
I'm curious. I'm just curious to
definitely.
know your thoughts. It kind of blew my mind, but at the same time, it was so like subtle, and I don't really know what it was about it that I liked it so much.
No, I want to see it.
See, what happens a lot of times when I watch cop movies, I get distracted by the silly stuff, right? Almost every single movie I see, there's a gun battle of some type, and nobody ever writes reports. Like nobody ever gets in trouble.
We don't have time.
You know, it's like like you never see them going, "Hey, let me just write this down real quick." 99% of what I do is write. We write all day long. You have to document everything you do.
Yeah.
Collecting evidence, talking to people, any gathering of any intelligence, all of that stuff has to be written down in order for it to be effective. And that's missing in every single movie.
Yeah.
And it's always your typical, like, you ever notice there's always the angry guy, right? Like, he's the guy who throws everything off. Oh, you know what? Rah! And he goes crazy, knocks the computer over, or the guy who's missing a few screws and everybody thinks he's crazy. That's just not real. You can't be that guy. But in Hollywood, you can. You can take that, your undercover Mustang. Because I don't know if you see how many Mustangs we have next door?
It's a lot.
So many.
They're just laying around. Like anybody have a Testarossa they want to give away today?
They're always exploding.
Right?
I did see that Hummer down there, though.
Yeah, that's our swap.
Come on,
meets.
Dan. I love Lethal Weapon.
But it's funny because you got these high speed chases where things are blowing up and cars are flying through the air, and
That's a funny sketch. It's like
funny for
Hollywood Police Academy. It's like where they train like driving cars into buildings and like
that's so unrealistic, but it's what people have come to expect.
Well, is there a show or a movie that does the law enforcement genre very, very well? Like, what about The Wire? You watch The Wire?
Yeah. No.
No?
Yeah.
Did you ever see
just
that?
nothing.
No, I can tell you so
nothing does it right.
that the exaggerations in The Wire, I know where they come from. So they're probably born in some real world experience, and then they put about 90 pounds of Hollywood on it to make it really interesting, and then they write some other things and they link them all together to make it entertaining. But a lot of that show had a lot of conspiracy stuff in it, where like 10 people were involved in this one thing. That's literally, you can't have 10 people involved in this one thing without somebody talking about it eventually. And all of those, subplots and things, that it's just so unrealistic. It's a great show. Don't get me wrong. It's fun to watch, but that's not real.
Sounds like
Not even
it
close.
sounds like a very realistic cop show. Would probably not be very marketable.
It would be boring.
Yeah.
It would be boring.
Report. Rated R.
Exactly.
What about Police Story with
it would
Jackie
be a guy
Chan?
writing. It'd be a guy writing like this, going like really fancy music. Dun 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 dun. Enter.
I can take notes faster than
Have you ever seen Swordfish, where there's like the hacking scene and it's like this just like 3D neon nonsense floating in the air? It's so funny. Hugh Jackman is just like it's the most absurd.
I always get a kick out of movies like that.
It's
where-
like mid 2000s.
you ever notice no one uses a mouse ever? And they're like,
Yeah, never.
There's no time.
wait a minute, what? Where's your mouse?
There's nothing cool. There's
That's
nothing cool.
funny. Now I'm gonna look for that.
He's just like,
because the clicking has more
on a
energy
second.
to it. Yeah.
wow, you're quite the hacker, man. I'm impressed.
There was a movie I saw.
Tab.
There was a movie I saw years ago now, but I thought it. Man, if there was a real, it's what stood out to me as being maybe realistic, and I'm curious if you've seen it. We Own the Night.
No.
Robert Duvall and Joaquin Phoenix.
No.
It's a father-son situation.
Yeah.
And
Was it a good movie?
I thought it was.
I remember seeing
it was a
it
great
marketed.
movie. I thought it
forgot
was a
that
great
Joaquin
movie.
was in that.
I thought it was way underappreciated.
Huh.
Things to see.
Have you seen Prisoners?
Prisoners. Was that the one with Clooney in it?
Jake Gyllenhaal.
No.
And who's in it, Jamin?
These are always the most
Jake-
exciting parts of our podcast.
Yeah, right.
Just
Did you see that movie? That's our movie with the one guy with the thing.
The thing. and
He was in that other movie with that lady.
we don't actually like watch movies and like do our homework and then talk about them.
No.
We just pontificate.
Yeah,
Like,
once in a while.
we speculate.
The whole rest of the podcast is, have you seen
I think it is Hugh Jackman. Another Hugh Jackman thing.
Is any movie with a cop in it?
Nope.
Jake Gyllenhaal
But have you
and
seen-
Hugh Jackman?
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily like just focus on the police, but Jake Gyllenhaal's character is a cop, and it feels very realistic, and especially the way they leave you in the ending is like very like it's amazing.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I'll check it out.
Yeah.
See, I'm always looking for that one film that strikes me as, okay, that's believable.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen very many police films or characters that are police officers. The way Hollywood depicts it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the real world effect of Hollywood's approach to police is that people believe it.
Oh yeah.
Right. So, hey, here's a video, enhance that. And the guy he hacks away on that keyboard, boom, and it's enhanced. Next thing you know, you can see the whiskers on his mustache.
You're like, what
it's
cameras are
outrageous,
these
right?
where the resolution is infinite?
Well, it makes you wonder why the original image out of camera just isn't pre-enhanced.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, what process of enhancement do you have to go through?
Hit the enhance
Why is this happening in post on the Windows 95 machine
Exactly.
of the police station?
So,
Enhance.
as not only as a detective, but I also happen to be the department's forensic video analyst. I've gone to school for it, forensic video and presentation in court, and I get a kick out of it because you guys know this. It's garbage in, garbage out.
Always.
If your video is blurry or unstable, there are some things you can do to it. But the details that they come up with in Hollywood, you go, oh my goodness. Let's reconstruct a bullet in 3D, like in Batman, and then get a fingerprint off it.
Yeah, but that's Bruce Wayne. He can do that.
No, he can't.
Yeah, he can.
But with enough money in a basement,
Yeah, with a lot of lights.
You
above
can
you,
do
Morgan
anything.
Freeman off. Pretty well. If Morgan Freeman, yeah, right,
Yeah,
he
okay.
could.
He
he
come
could
on,
do
man,
that.
with those hidden bank accounts.
Yeah. So I mean, it's stuff like that.
Yeah.
The enhance button, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But because one of my responsibilities right now in the department for just a couple more months, I also do mobile forensics, digital and mobile forensics. And I'm always looking for that one scene where I can believe that the tech they're talking about is legit.
No.
Just the Hollywood version of it is so exaggerated, and the real world effects of Hollywood is that when people watch this stuff, they believe that that's real. And then when you try a real case in court, they want to know why you couldn't get a DNA sample off a fly that went by in the room. It's really an unrealistic expectation. And the basis of knowledge is usually a bunch of Hollywood movies that were written by a guy who's never done the job and doesn't know anything about it, but is pretty creative.
Right.
Right. And that's the biggest challenge. Not that I wouldn't get involved in making a ridiculously, Hollywood police movie. I would if I had to, but there's a part of me that always wants to show the more realistic side of it. Keep it based on reality and not so much the fantasy of, which is weird. Hollywood glorifies the police, and at the same time, they criticize. It's like they got this love-hate relationship.
Yeah.
They're making tons and tons of shows about police and law and order and all those other things, and then on the political side of it, they're always bashing the police. So it's a strange,
Yeah, Hollywood
backwards.
also
strange relationship.
glorifies like thieves.
Yeah,
Stealing stuff is like the greatest in a movie.
Going back to the conversation we were having about messages and how I get involved, and for me, if a message in a project that I'm working on doesn't align with mine, I just don't do it. I don't mind telling someone, with all due respect, I don't think I can get behind this. It just doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't make me feel proud to say I was part of it. Music that's denigrating to women or racial slurs and things like that. I'm out. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very nice to know you, but no. And I've done that before, and people usually are surprised that I've turned down money. I turned down $50,000 to do a music video, and I said, I don't like your song.
Yeah, it's sad that integrity can be bought a lot of the time, like
Yeah.
you were saying.
My integrity is not for sale. It never will be.
Okay, $1 million.
Well said.
Well, it depends on what you're at. $1 million for what? What are we doing here?
Well, it depends on that.
You want me to play a crazy cop? Done. Give me the $1 million.
I'm in.
Guess I won't ask you to be a part of my show where I prank police officers.
Oh, that would be a bad idea. That's not. That
Well,
show
what if it
won't
was
be
another police
successful.
officer that did it?
One episode. I could see episode 2 being a problem. Yeah. One episode might be funny.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we should wrap this up. This has been super, super fun. Anything else you guys want to ask before we adjourn?
No, it's been fun. I think we should have Dan come back.